Hey everyone, welcome back to Try Not to Sleep. I'm your host, Ethan Brooks, and as always, we're here with another calm, slightly boring story from history to help you unwind. Tonight, we will be talking about the story of Fall Asleep to the entire story of Atlantis. Alright, get comfortable, and let's see how far you make it before you fall asleep. Plato first introduced the story of Atlantis in Athens around 360 BC. He presented the narrative in two philosophical dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. These texts are the only surviving ancient sources that describe Atlantis in detail. In both dialogues, Plato uses the character Critias to recount the story. Critias claims to have received the tale through oral tradition, supposedly passed down from his ancestor, Solon, who heard it in Egypt. Plato places the events of Atlantis about 9,600 years before his own time, which would be around 9,500 BC. According to the dialogues, Atlantis was a powerful island nation located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which refers to the Strait of Gibraltar. The Atlanteans are described as possessing great wealth, advanced technology, and a formidable navy. Their society is depicted as highly organized, with a central government and a complex social structure. The story describes how Atlantis expanded its influence across the Mediterranean and attempted to conquer Athens. The Athenians, according to the account, successfully resisted the Atlantean invasion. Afterward, Atlantis supposedly fell out of favor with the gods due to its moral decline and was destroyed in a single day and night by earthquakes and floods, sinking beneath the sea. Plato's account does not appear in any earlier Greek literature. No other ancient Greek historian, including Thucydides, mentions a conflict between Athens and a Western maritime empire. The details of Atlantis, such as its location, society, and destruction, are unique to Plato's dialogues. Ancient Greek writers like Strabo later critiqued the story, noting its lack of corroboration in other sources. Plato's dialogues were written in the context of his philosophical academy. He used the Atlantis narrative to explore themes relevant to his time, including the dangers of unchecked democracy and material excess. These concerns reflected his observations of contemporary Athens. The story also served to illustrate the virtues of an ideal society, as represented by ancient Athens, and the consequences of moral and political decline, as seen in Atlantis. The dating of Atlantis, set 9,000 years before Solon, placed it well beyond the reach of historical verification. This gap gave the story an ancient and mysterious quality, making it difficult to challenge factually. The lack of physical evidence and the absence of earlier references have led many scholars to interpret the Atlantis account as a literary or philosophical construction, rather than a record of actual events. Plato's introduction of Atlantis in Timaeus and Critias established the foundation for centuries of debate, speculation, and exploration regarding the lost civilization. His narrative continues to influence discussions about ancient history and myth. Role of Critias and oral tradition in the narrative. In Plato's dialogues, the character Critias plays a central role in delivering the story of Atlantis. Critias claims he received the account from his grandfather, who in turn heard it from Solon, the famous Athenian lawgiver. According to the narrative, Solon learned about Atlantis during his travels in Egypt. Egyptian priests at the Temple of Se reportedly shared the story with him, describing a powerful civilization that existed thousands of years before. The transmission of the Atlantis story relies entirely on oral tradition. Critias states that his grandfather memorized Solon's account and passed it down within the family. Plato presents this chain of transmission to give the story a sense of authority and antiquity. The use of oral tradition was common in ancient Greece, where stories, laws, and histories were often preserved and shared by word of mouth before being written down. Plato provides specific details about the chain of transmission. He names his great-grandfather, Dropides, as the person who received the story from Solon. The narrative then moves from Dropides to Critias, the elder, and finally to Critias, Plato's contemporary and the speaker in the dialogue. Each step in this chain is described as a direct personal communication, emphasizing the supposed reliability of the account. Solon's encounter with the Egyptian priests is described as a formal exchange of knowledge. The priests are said to have access to ancient written records that preserve the history of Atlantis and its conflict with early Athens. They tell Solon that the Greeks are forgetful of their own past due to periodic catastrophes, while Egyptian civilization has maintained continuous records. This claim supports the idea that the Atlantis story is older than any surviving Greek tradition. Plato's use of oral tradition and named intermediaries serves several purposes. It anchors the Atlantis narrative in the framework of Greek history and genealogy. It also deflects responsibility for the story's accuracy from Plato himself, placing it instead in the mouths of respected ancestors and foreign authorities. This technique was not uncommon in ancient literature, where authors often attributed information to earlier sources to enhance credibility. No independent evidence confirms the existence of this oral tradition outside Plato's dialogues. There are no Egyptian records mentioning Atlantis, and no other Greek authors before Plato refer to such a story. The entire narrative, as presented, depends on the testimony of Critias and the supposed memory of his family. This reliance on oral tradition has contributed to ongoing debates about the historical basis of the Atlantis account. Purpose of Atlantis as a philosophical allegory. Plato introduced Atlantis within the context of his philosophical dialogues. He wrote Timaeus and Critias while leading his academy in Athens. These works used extended narratives to illustrate political and ethical ideas. In the dialogues, Atlantis is described as a powerful and wealthy civilization that gradually falls into moral decline. Plato contrasts Atlantis with ancient Athens, which he portrays as virtuous, orderly, and just. The story of Atlantis served as an example of the dangers Plato observed in his own society. Athens, in Plato's era, faced political instability, factionalism, and the influence of wealth on public life. Plato used the Atlantis narrative to highlight the risks of unchecked democracy, corruption, and material excess. In the dialogues, the Atlanteans begin as noble and disciplined, but become greedy and ambitious over time. Their decline leads to aggression against neighboring peoples, including Athens. Plato's account presents Atlantis as a cautionary tale. The destruction of Atlantis by earthquakes and floods is described as divine punishment for the Atlanteans' hubris and loss of virtue. This narrative framework allowed Plato to explore the consequences of political and moral failure. He used the story to argue for moderation, civic responsibility, and the maintenance of ethical standards in government. The depiction of Athens in the Atlantis story also reflects Plato's philosophical ideals. He describes the Athenians as united, courageous, and committed to the common good. Their resistance to the Atlantean invasion is presented as a model of collective action and virtue. Plato's ideal Athens is governed by wise rulers and guided by reason, in contrast to the excess and disorder of Atlantis. Plato's contemporaries would have recognized these themes. The dialogues were written after the Peloponnesian War, a period marked by the decline of Athenian power and internal conflict. Plato's use of Atlantis as a narrative device allowed him to address contemporary issues without direct criticism of specific individuals or factions. The story provided a framework for discussing the strengths and weaknesses of different forms of government. The philosophical function of the Atlantis narrative is further supported by the lack of corroborating historical evidence. Plato does not claim to offer a literal history, but instead presents the story through a chain of reported tradition. Later ancient writers, such as Strabo, noted the allegorical nature of the account and questioned its factual basis. Plato's use of Atlantis as a philosophical allegory influenced later interpretations of the story. Many scholars have viewed the narrative as a tool for teaching political and ethical lessons, rather than as a record of actual events. The enduring appeal of Atlantis can be traced to its role as both a compelling myth and a vehicle for philosophical argument. Athens and the intellectual climate of 4th century BC. In the 4th century BC, Athens was a major center of learning and political activity in the Greek world. The city had recently experienced the aftermath of the Peloponnesian War, which ended in 404 BC with the defeat of Athens by Sparta. This loss led to a period of political instability and social change. Democratic institutions were restored after the brief rule of the 30 tyrants, but confidence in the traditional political system had been shaken. During this period, Athens attracted thinkers, teachers, and students from across the Greek world. Philosophers such as Plato, Aristotle, and their contemporaries debated issues of ethics, politics, and knowledge. Plato founded his academy around 387 BC, creating a space for systematic study and discussion. His student Aristotle later established the Lyceum, another influential school. Athens was also home to other philosophical groups, including the Cynics, Megarians, and later the Stoics and Epicureans. These schools often competed for students and patronage. Public lectures, debates, and written dialogues became common features of Athenian intellectual life. Rhetoric and oratory were highly valued skills, especially in the law courts and political assemblies. The city's intellectual climate was shaped by the presence of libraries, gymnasia, and public spaces for discussion. Wealthy citizens sometimes sponsored philosophers or donated resources to schools. Written works circulated among educated Athenians, and the copying of texts became an important activity. Historians such as Thucydides and Xenophon recorded contemporary events and analyzed the causes of conflict and change. Thucydides, in particular, set new standards for critical historical writing. He focused on eyewitness accounts and careful examination of evidence. However, he did not mention Atlantis or any similar Western empire in his histories. Athens maintained connections with other Greek cities and with foreign cultures. Trade, travel, and diplomatic missions brought news and ideas from Egypt, Persia, and the wider Mediterranean. Egyptian priests were known as sources of ancient knowledge, and Greek visitors often reported learning from them. This background made stories like the Atlantis narrative plausible to many Athenians. The 4th century BC also saw advances in mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy. Figures like Eudoxus and Theaetetus contributed to geometry and the study of the cosmos. Medical knowledge expanded through the work of Hippocratic physicians. Drama, poetry, and art continued to flourish, supported by public festivals and private patronage. In this environment, Plato's dialogues found an audience interested in both myth and rational inquiry. The intellectual climate of Athens encouraged the exploration of new ideas, the questioning of tradition, and the blending of history with philosophical argument. This setting helped ensure the lasting influence of stories like Atlantis, the Pillars of Hercules, and geographical placement. Plato described Atlantis as lying beyond the Pillars of Hercules. In ancient Greek geography, the Pillars of Hercules referred to the two promontories flanking the entrance to the Strait of Gibraltar. The northern pillar was identified as the Rock of Gibraltar, and the southern pillar as either Monte Hacho or Jebel Musa in North Africa. This strait marked the western boundary of the known Mediterranean world for the Greeks. Plato's texts specify that Atlantis was a large island situated in the Atlantic Ocean, west of the Pillars. He wrote that the island was larger than Libya and Asia combined, using the ancient Greek understanding of those regions. According to Timaeus and Critias, Atlantis was a naval power that controlled islands and territories as far as the Mediterranean. The Atlanteans are said to have ruled parts of North Africa and Western Europe, extending their influence deep into the Mediterranean basin. The placement of Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules set it apart from other legendary lands in Greek tradition. Most mythical locations, such as the land of the Hyperboreans or the Garden of the Hesperides, were placed at the margins of the known world. Atlantis, however, was described as a real island with specific geographical relationships to the Mediterranean and the Atlantic Ocean. Ancient Greek sailors and traders reached the western Mediterranean and the Atlantic coasts of Iberia and North Africa. They encountered local peoples and heard stories of distant lands beyond the strait. Phoenician and Carthaginian navigators also explored these waters, establishing settlements and trading posts along the Atlantic coast. Greek and Roman writers sometimes reported rumors of islands in the Atlantic, such as the Isles of the Blessed and the Fortunate Isles, but none matched Plato's detailed description of Atlantis. The identification of the Pillars of Hercules as the limit of the Mediterranean was widely accepted in antiquity. Later geographers, including Strabo and Ptolemy, retained this definition. The strait remained a symbolic and practical boundary for navigation and exploration until the Age of Discovery. Plato's placement of Atlantis beyond the Pillars gave the story a sense of realism and geographic precision. It also contributed to later speculation and exploration. During the Renaissance and early modern period, explorers and scholars searched for remains of Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean, and even the Americas. The Pillars of Hercules continued to serve as a reference point in these quests, anchoring the legendary island to a real-world location known to the Greeks. No archaeological evidence has been found west of the Pillars that matches Plato's description. However, the geographical placement of Atlantis remains a central element in discussions about the story's origins and possible historical basis. The association with the Atlantic Ocean has influenced interpretations and theories for more than 2,000 years. Absence of Atlantis in other ancient Greek histories. No ancient Greek historian before or after Plato provides an independent account of Atlantis. Thucydides, who wrote in the late 5th century BC, produced detailed histories of the Peloponnesian War and earlier Greek conflict. He carefully documented migrations, battles, and political changes in the Greek world. Thucydides did not mention any Western maritime empire, or a conflict between Athens and a power beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Herodotus, known as the father of history, traveled widely and collected stories from Egypt, Persia, and the Mediterranean. His histories, written in the 5th century BC, include descriptions of distant lands and people. Herodotus reported on Egypt's ancient traditions and Greek interactions with foreign cultures. He never referred to Atlantis or any similar island civilization in the Atlantic. Other classical authors, such as Xenophon and Diodorus Siculus, recorded Greek history and myth. Xenophon focused on the aftermath of the Peloponnesian War and the rise of Persia. Diodorus compiled a universal history in the 1st century BC, drawing on a wide range of sources, including Egyptian and Greek traditions. Neither author mentioned Atlantis or described a lost Western empire. Greek geographers and travelers, including Pytheas of Massalia, explored the Atlantic coasts of Europe and North Africa. Pytheas sailed from the Mediterranean to Britain, and possibly beyond, around 325 BC. He recorded observations about the Atlantic Ocean, the British Isles, and northern peoples. His surviving fragments do not reference Atlantis or any large island west of the Pillars of Hercules. Strabo, a Greek geographer writing during the early Roman Empire, systematically reviewed ancient accounts of geography and myth. In his Geographica, Strabo discussed Plato's story of Atlantis and expressed skepticism about its historicity. He noted the lack of corroborating evidence in Egyptian or Greek records, and suggested that Plato's account served a literary or philosophical purpose. Strabo's critique became a reference point for later discussions about the plausibility of Atlantis. Roman writers, including Pliny the Elder and Pomponius Mela, also described the Atlantic Ocean and its island. They repeated earlier Greek reports about the Fortunate Isles and other distant lands, but did not provide independent confirmation of Atlantis. No inscriptions, monuments, or archaeological remains from the ancient Mediterranean world mention Atlantis outside of Plato's dialogues. The absence of Atlantis in the works of major Greek historians, geographers, and travelers is a consistent pattern. All known references to Atlantis in antiquity trace back to Plato's Timaeus and Critias. This lack of independent evidence has shaped scholarly views on the story's origins and its status as a unique creation within Greek literature. Plato provided a specific timeline for the events of Atlantis in his dialogue. He stated that Atlantis existed 9,000 years before the time of Solon, the Athenian lawgiver. Solon lived around 600 BC, so Plato's account places the destruction of Atlantis at approximately 9,600 BC. This date is far earlier than any known Greek or Mediterranean civilization. It falls just after the end of the last ice age, during a period when human societies were primarily hunter-gatherers, or in the earliest stages of agriculture. Plato's dating of Atlantis had several implications for later readers and scholars. The 9,000-year gap made it impossible to verify the story through known historical records or archaeological evidence. No written documents, monuments, or artifacts from that era have been found to support the existence of a complex civilization matching Plato's description. The traditional dating also placed Atlantis before the rise of the earliest known civilizations in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Aegean. In antiquity, the extreme antiquity of Atlantis raised questions among Greek and later Roman writers. Some question whether Plato had misunderstood Egyptian chronology or used a symbolic number. Others suggested that the story was intended as a myth or allegory, rather than a literal account. The lack of parallel accounts in Egyptian, Greek, or Near Eastern sources contributed to doubts about the historical reality of Atlantis. The dating of Atlantis also created conflicts with biblical chronologies in later centuries. Biblical scholars often calculated the creation of the world at around 4000 BC, with the flood and the earliest civilizations appearing only a few thousand years before the Christian era. Plato's timeline for Atlantis was much older, making it difficult to reconcile with biblical and traditional histories. Some Christian writers proposed that Plato had misinterpreted Egyptian records, confusing lunar years with solar years, or that Atlantis referred to antediluvian civilizations mentioned in Genesis. During the Middle Ages, the story of Atlantis was largely forgotten in Western Europe. The original Greek texts were not widely available, and the extreme antiquity assigned to Atlantis did not fit with prevailing historical models. The Renaissance brought renewed interest in Plato's works, as scholars recovered Greek manuscripts and compared ancient accounts with new discoveries. The dating of Atlantis continued to pose challenges for those seeking to identify it with real historical cultures. Modern archaeology has found no evidence of a civilization as advanced as Atlantis existing in 9600 BC. Known societies at that time were small, mobile, and lacked the monumental architecture, metallurgy, and political organization described by Plato. The dating remains one of the most significant obstacles to accepting Atlantis as a historical reality. It also continues to shape discussions about the story's meaning and origin, conflicts with biblical and traditional chronologies. Plato's dating of Atlantis to around 9600 BC created immediate conflicts with biblical and traditional chronologies. In the ancient world, many cultures developed their own systems for measuring time and recording history. The Hebrew Bible, for example, provided a chronology that placed the creation of the world at roughly 4000 BC, according to calculations by later scholars. This biblical timeline allowed only a few thousand years for the development of all human civilization. Early Christian writers noticed the discrepancy between Plato's account and biblical tradition. Some argued that Plato must have misunderstood the Egyptian priests' records, perhaps confusing lunar years with solar years. If lunar years were intended, the actual period would be much shorter, bringing the story of Atlantis closer to the biblical timeline. Others suggested that the Egyptian sources themselves were unreliable, or that the story was allegorical rather than historical. During the Middle Ages, most Western European scholars relied on biblical chronology as the framework for world history. The story of Atlantis, preserved only in Greek manuscripts, was largely unknown or ignored. When it did appear, writers sometimes tried to reconcile it with biblical events, such as the flood described in Genesis. Some speculated that Atlantis was a reference to antediluvian civilizations destroyed in the Great Flood, but no consensus emerged. In the Byzantine East, scholars had greater access to Greek texts and sometimes showed more interest in the Atlantis narrative. Even so, the extreme antiquity assigned to Atlantis remained problematic. The Byzantine tradition maintained a closer link to classical sources, but biblical chronology still dominated historical thinking. With the Renaissance, the recovery of Plato's dialogues and other ancient texts brought renewed attention to the Atlantis story. Scholars and explorers compared classical accounts with new discoveries in the Americas and elsewhere. Some writers attempted to fit Atlantis into biblical history by proposing alternative interpretations of Plato's numbers, or by identifying Atlantis with locations mentioned in Scripture. Chronological conflicts persisted into the early modern period. The rise of critical historical scholarship and the development of archaeology introduced new methods for dating ancient civilizations. These advances confirmed that no known culture matching Plato's description existed in the time frame he provided. Attempts to resolve the conflict included reducing the age of Atlantis by reinterpreting the original Greek or Egyptian texts, or by linking Atlantis to later, historically attested societies. Despite these efforts, the gap between Plato's dating and traditional chronologies has never been fully bridged. The issue continues to influence both academic and popular debates about the reality and significance of Atlantis. The story remains an outlier in the chronology of ancient civilizations, standing apart from both biblical and archaeological timelines. Early Christian writers encountered the Atlantis story through references in classical literature. During late antiquity, most Western theologians relied on Latin translations and biblical sources. Plato's dialogues, including Timaeus and Critias, were not widely circulated in the Latin West. As a result, direct engagement with the Atlantis narrative was limited among early Western Christian scholars. Some early Christian thinkers, such as Tertullian and Augustine, addressed questions about ancient civilizations and the origins of humanity. They did not mention Atlantis directly, but their writings reflected skepticism toward pagan accounts of pre-biblical history. Augustine in the City of God argued that all human history began after the biblical creation and the flood. He dismissed stories of civilizations predating these events as either misunderstandings or fabrication. Few Christian writers attempted to reconcile the story of Atlantis with biblical tradition. They speculated that Plato's account might refer to antediluvian peoples destroyed by the flood. Some suggested that Plato misunderstood Egyptian chronology or used symbolic numbers. These efforts remained marginal, and no consensus emerged among early Christian theologians. In the Byzantine Empire, Greek language and scholarship persisted after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Byzantine scholars maintained access to Plato's original works, including the Atlantis dialogue. They copied, studied, and commented on classical texts in monastic and urban centers, such as Constantinople, Thessaloniki, and Mount Athos. Byzantine intellectuals sometimes showed more interest in the Atlantis story than their Western counterparts. They included references to Atlantis in encyclopedic works and commentaries on Plato. Some Byzantine scholars treated Atlantis as a genuine historical tradition, while others classified it as a philosophical allegory or myth. The story appeared in Byzantine collections of marvels and wonders, alongside other legendary lands and peoples. Byzantine writers also preserved and transmitted classical geographical knowledge. They discussed the Pillars of Hercules, the Atlantic Ocean, and ancient accounts of distant islands. Some Byzantine geographers and historians speculated about the possible location of Atlantis, drawing on both Greek and biblical traditions. However, no systematic search for Atlantis was undertaken during the Byzantine period. The continuity of Greek scholarship in Byzantium ensured that the Atlantis story survived through the Middle Ages. When Western Europe began to recover Greek texts during the Renaissance, the Byzantine tradition played a key role. Greek scholars fleeing the fall of Constantinople in 1453 brought manuscripts of Plato's works, including the Atlantis dialogues, to Italy and other parts of Europe. In summary, early Christian writers in the West largely ignored or dismissed the Atlantis story, while Byzantine scholars preserved and occasionally discussed it. This difference in reception contributed to the survival and later revival of the Atlantis narrative in European intellectual history. During the early Middle Ages, most of Western Europe lost direct access to Greek philosophical texts, including Plato's dialogues. The decline of Greek literacy in the Latin West meant that original works by Plato were rarely read or copied. Latin summaries and commentaries sometimes mention Plato, but they did not preserve the full texts of Timaeus or Critias. The Atlantis story, as a result, became almost unknown in Western Europe for several centuries. In contrast, the Byzantine Empire maintained a tradition of Greek scholarship. Monasteries and urban centers in Constantinople and other cities housed collections of classical manuscripts. Byzantine scribes continued to copy and study Greek philosophical works, including those of Plato. The dialogues containing the Atlantis story survived in these Eastern libraries, though they were not always widely circulated. During the High Middle Ages, Western European scholars began to seek out lost works of classical antiquity. Contact between Latin and Greek-speaking Christian communities increased through trade, diplomacy, and the Crusades. Some Western scholars traveled to Byzantine territories to study Greek language and literature. They sometimes returned with copies of important manuscripts. The systematic recovery of Greek texts accelerated in the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance. Italian humanists, interested in the roots of Western thought, organized searches for classical manuscripts in monastic libraries and private collections. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 marked a turning point. Many Greek scholars fled westward, bringing with them valuable manuscripts, including works by Plato. These Greek refugees settled in cities such as Florence, Venice, and Rome. They taught Greek to Italian scholars and helped translate key texts into Latin. The Platonic dialogues, including Timaeus and Critias, were among the works recovered and translated during this period. The Atlantis story, once largely forgotten in the West, became accessible again to European intellectuals. The printing press, invented in the mid-15th century, played a crucial role in the wider dissemination of Platonic texts. Early printed editions of Plato's works appeared in Greek and Latin. Scholars and philosophers across Europe gained access to the dialogues, sparking renewed interest in Plato's ideas and stories. By the late 15th and 16th centuries, the Atlantis narrative was once again part of European intellectual life. Writers, explorers, and theologians debated its meaning and possible historical basis. Some compared Plato's account to newly discovered lands in the Atlantic and the Americas. Others used the story as a reference point in discussions of ancient history and lost civilization. The recovery of Platonic texts in the Renaissance ensured the survival and spread of the Atlantis story. This process connected the ancient Greek tradition, preserved in Byzantium, with the emerging scholarly culture of early modern Europe. Byzantine scholarship and preservation of ancient sources. Byzantine scholars played a central role in preserving ancient Greek texts, including those of Plato. After the division of the Roman Empire in the late 4th century, the Eastern Roman Empire, known as Byzantium, maintained Greek as its official language. This linguistic continuity allowed scholars to read, copy, and teach classical works that had become inaccessible in the Latin West. Monasteries and urban scriptoria in Constantinople and other major Byzantine cities housed extensive manuscript collections. Monks and professional scribes copied works by Plato, Aristotle, and other classical authors. These manuscripts included both philosophical treatises and commentaries written by later scholars. The preservation of Plato's dialogues, such as Timaeus and Critias, depended on this steady tradition of copying and study. Byzantine intellectuals produced commentaries and summaries to aid the understanding of difficult texts. They sometimes compiled encyclopedic works, such as the Suda, which referenced a wide range of ancient authors, including Plato. These compilations helped transmit knowledge about lost or fragmentary works. When original manuscripts were damaged or lost, summaries and quotations in Byzantine writings provided alternative sources of information. Educational institutions in Byzantium, such as the University of Constantinople, trained students in grammar, rhetoric, and philosophy. Instruction often included readings from Plato and Aristotle. Teachers encouraged students to memorize passages and discuss philosophical arguments. This educational system created generations of scholars familiar with the classical tradition. The Byzantine Empire faced periods of crisis, including invasions, civil wars, and the sack of Constantinople in 1204. Despite these disruptions, many manuscripts survived in monastic libraries and private collections. Some texts were moved to safer locations during times of danger. After the final fall of Constantinople in 1453, Greek scholars carried manuscripts to Western Europe, seeking refuge and patronage. Byzantine scribes also engaged in the collation and correction of texts. They compared different manuscript copies to identify errors and preserve accurate versions. Marginal notes and scholia in Byzantine manuscripts often recorded variant readings and explanations. These scholarly practices improved the quality of surviving texts and aided later editors and translators. The preservation of ancient sources in Byzantium included works beyond philosophy. Histories, scientific treatises, medical texts, and works of literature were also copied and studied. Byzantine scholars translated some Greek texts into other languages, such as Syriac and Arabic, further extending their influence. Through these efforts, the Byzantine tradition maintained a direct link to the intellectual heritage of ancient Greece. This continuity ensured that works like Plato's Dialogues and the story of Atlantis remained available for later generations. When Western scholars gained access to these texts during the Renaissance, they benefited from centuries of careful preservation and scholarly attention in Byzantium. Renaissance, exploration, and comparative analysis. During the Renaissance, the recovery of Greek texts led to renewed interest in classical antiquity. Scholars in Italy, France, Spain, and other parts of Europe began to study Plato's dialogues in the original Greek or in New Latin translation. The story of Atlantis, now accessible to Western readers, became a subject of debate and speculation. Renaissance thinkers compared Plato's account of Atlantis with other ancient sources. They examined Greek and Roman texts for references to lost lands, ancient floods, and distant civilizations. Some scholars noted similarities between Plato's Atlantis and legendary islands mentioned by Herodotus, Pliny the Elder, and Pomponius Mela. Others searched for parallels in biblical narratives, especially the story of the flood and the Tower of Babel. The Age of Exploration brought new discoveries that influenced interpretations of Atlantis. European explorers reached the coasts of Africa, the Americas, and the islands of the Atlantic. Reports of unfamiliar lands and peoples encouraged speculation about lost civilizations. Some writers suggested that the newly discovered Americas might be the remains of Atlantis described by Plato. In 1590, Francisco López de Gomara and other authors began to publish works comparing classical accounts of lost civilizations with contemporary discoveries. They analyzed similarities in geography, climate, and culture. Some proposed that migration waves from the Old World had populated the Americas, carrying memories of ancient societies. These theories did not require direct continuity with Atlantis, but they offered explanations for parallels between Platonic descriptions and New World realities. Renaissance scholars also examined ancient chronologies. They debated the meaning of Plato's 9,000-year dating for Atlantis. Some argued that Plato had misunderstood Egyptian records or used symbolic numbers. Others attempted to reconcile the Atlantis story with biblical and historical timelines. Chronological difficulties remained unresolved, but the debate stimulated further research into ancient history and chronology. The recovery of Greek texts led to the creation of new maps and atlases. Cartographers included speculative islands and continents based on classical sources and travelers' reports. The Atlantic Ocean, once seen as a barrier, became a region of interest for explorers and scholars alike. Some maps labeled possible locations for Atlantis, often west of the Pillars of Hercules or near the Azores and Canary Islands. Interest in Atlantis extended beyond academic circles. Poets, dramatists, and artists drew inspiration from Plato's narrative. The story appeared in works of literature, art, and popular imagination. Renaissance curiosity about ancient mysteries contributed to the enduring appeal of Atlantis as a symbol of lost knowledge and exploration. By the end of the Renaissance, the story of Atlantis had become a fixture in European thought. Comparative analysis of ancient and modern sources, combined with new discoveries, ensured that the legend continued to inspire debate and investigation. Migration theories linking Atlantis to the Americas. In the late 16th and 17th centuries, European scholars and explorers began to develop migration theories that linked Atlantis to the Americas. The discovery of the New World by Christopher Columbus in 1492 had introduced Europeans to unfamiliar peoples, animals, and plants. Reports from Spanish and Portuguese expeditions described advanced societies in Central and South America, including the Aztec and Inca Empire. These observations prompted some writers to draw connections between the civilizations of the Americas and Plato's account of Atlantis. One of the earliest systematic attempts to link Atlantis to the Americas appeared in works such as De Lasas, published in 1590. Authors like Francisco López de Gomara and later Acosta argued that the Americas could have been settled by successive waves of migration from the Old World. They suggested that ancient peoples, possibly survivors from Atlantis, crossed the Atlantic Ocean and established new societies in the Western Hemisphere. These theories did not require direct historical continuity with Plato's Atlantis, but proposed that memories of a lost civilization could have influenced indigenous American culture. Supporters of migration theories pointed to similarities between Platonic descriptions and features observed in American societies. They noted the existence of monumental architecture, complex political systems, and advanced agricultural practices among native people. Some writers compared the pyramids of Mesoamerica to the architecture described in Plato's account. Others highlighted the use of irrigation, metallurgy, and organized religion as further parallels. Botanical and zoological evidence also played a role in these debates. Scholars observed that certain plants and animals were found on both sides of the Atlantic. They speculated that ancient transoceanic contact, possibly involving Atlantis, could explain these distributions. Theories about the diffusion of cultivated crops, such as maize and cotton, were used to support the idea of prehistoric migration and cultural exchange. Linguistic arguments were sometimes advanced to reinforce migration theories. Researchers compared indigenous American languages with those of the Old World, searching for common roots or similarities. However, these methods often lacked scientific rigor and were later criticized by comparative linguists. The absence of reliable linguistic evidence made it difficult to establish concrete links between Atlantis and the Americas. By the 18th century, migration theories linking Atlantis to the Americas had become part of broader debates about the origins of indigenous peoples and the peopling of the New World. While no archaeological evidence supported the existence of a transatlantic Atlantean migration, the idea persisted in both scholarly and popular literature. The legend of Atlantis continued to serve as a framework for speculation about ancient contact and the diffusion of culture across continents. Linguistic and etymological arguments in Atlantis scholarship. In the 17th and 18th centuries, scholars began to use linguistic and etymological arguments to support or challenge theories about Atlantis. Researchers proposed that similarities between words in different languages could indicate ancient contact or shared origin. Some argued that certain names and terms found in the Americas, Africa, and Europe were derived from an Atlantean language. They believed that tracing these linguistic connections might reveal evidence for the existence and influence of Atlantis. Swedish scholars were among the early proponents of this approach. They attempted to link Scandinavian place names and words to those found in Plato's account of Atlantis. Olaus Rudbeck, a Swedish polymath, argued that Swedish was the original language of Atlantis and that ancient myths and legends preserved memories of the lost civilization. Rudbeck's work, published in the late 17th century, combined linguistic analysis with historical and geographical speculation. Other scholars expanded this method to compare languages across continents. They examined similarities between Greek, Egyptian, and Native American words. Some claimed that the names of gods, kings, or cities in Plato's dialogues could be matched with terms from distant cultures. These arguments often relied on superficial resemblances or creative interpretations of ancient texts. Critics pointed out that such methods could produce connections between almost any languages if enough flexibility was allowed in pronunciation and meaning. Linnaeus, a Swedish philologist, highlighted the problems with these etymological methods. He demonstrated that using similar techniques, one could link modern European languages to nearly any ancient term, regardless of historical plausibility. Linnaeus and others argued that linguistic connections require independent corroborating evidence, such as documented migration, archaeological remains, or consistent patterns in language development. The emergence of comparative linguistics as a discipline in the late 18th and 19th centuries brought more rigorous standards to the field. Scholars began to establish systematic methods for identifying genuine historical relationships between languages. They focused on regular sound changes, grammatical structures, and shared vocabulary that could not be explained by chance or borrowing. This approach led to the identification of language families, such as Indo-European, but did not support the existence of a distinct Atlantean language. Philological analysis gained credibility for arguments about language families and the diffusion of culture. However, no reliable evidence emerged to link any known language directly to Atlantis. The lack of written records or inscriptions from a supposed Atlantean civilization limited the scope of linguistic research. Most modern linguists consider earlier etymological arguments for Atlantis to be speculative and unsupported by systematic evidence. Despite these challenges, linguistic and etymological arguments continued to appear in popular works about Atlantis. They contributed to the ongoing fascination with the legend and its possible connections to ancient civilizations around the world. The 19th century saw the emergence of comparative linguistics as a formal discipline in Europe. Scholars such as Franz Bopp, Rasmus Rask, and Jacob Grimm developed systematic methods for analyzing relationships between languages. They focused on identifying regular sound changes, shared vocabulary, and consistent grammatical structure. Their work established the concept of language families, such as Indo-European, Uralic, and Semitic. Comparative linguistics required evidence from documented languages and written records, rather than speculation based on isolated word similarity. Philologists began to apply these methods to ancient texts and inscriptions. They reconstructed proto-languages and traced the historical development of spoken languages over time. This approach allowed researchers to distinguish between genuine linguistic relationships and accidental resemblances. Philological analysis became central to the study of the origins and diffusion of human languages. As comparative linguistics advanced, scholars revisited earlier claims about Atlantis and language. They examined the etymological arguments made in support of Atlantean connections to the Americas, Africa, and Europe. Many of these claims were found to lack methodological rigor. Researchers demonstrated that superficial similarities between words from distant languages could arise by chance or borrowing, especially in the absence of supporting historical or archaeological evidence. Philological critiques of Atlantis theories appeared in academic journals and monographs. Linguists pointed out that Plato's account contained no examples of Atlantean language or writing. The story in Timaeus and Critias described Atlantis in Greek, with no surviving inscriptions or artifacts to analyze. Without primary linguistic material, claims about an Atlantean language rested on speculation rather than data. Comparative linguists also addressed the broader question of cultural diffusion. They showed that language contact and borrowing were common in regions with trade, migration, or conquest. However, they found no evidence for a widespread linguistic substratum that could be traced to a lost Atlantean civilization. The spread of Indo-European languages, for example, could be explained by well-documented historical processes, not by the influence of an unknown Atlantic source. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, philological critiques became more influential in academic discussions of Atlantis. Scholars emphasized the importance of verifiable evidence and systematic methodology. They challenged earlier writers who relied on imaginative reconstructions or unproven linguistic links. The field of comparative linguistics continued to refine its techniques, further reducing the credibility of speculative arguments about Atlantis and language. Despite these critiques, popular works about Atlantis often repeated earlier etymological claims. The legend remained attractive to writers seeking connections between distant culture. Academic linguistics, however, moved away from Atlantis as a serious hypothesis, focusing instead on reconstructing the genuine history of human languages through evidence-based research. Development of systematic historical and ethnographic approaches. In the 19th century, historians and ethnographers began to adopt more systematic methods for studying ancient societies. The rise of scientific archaeology provided new tools for investigating the material remains of past cultures. Excavations in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Mediterranean uncovered cities, temples, and artifacts that could be dated and analyzed. Researchers documented the stratigraphy of sites and used pottery, inscriptions, and architectural styles to establish chronological sequences. Ethnographers traveled to various parts of the world to observe and record the customs, languages, and technologies of living peoples. They compiled detailed descriptions of social organization, religious practices, and material culture. These accounts were compared with ancient texts to identify patterns of continuity and change. The systematic collection of ethnographic data allowed for more accurate comparisons between societies, both past and present. Historians began to apply critical methods to the study of ancient narratives. They examined the sources, authorship, and context of historical texts. Scholars distinguished between myth, legend, and verifiable history. They compared accounts from different cultures to assess their reliability and to identify possible influences and borrowings. This approach was applied to Plato's Atlantis story, which was increasingly viewed as a literary creation rather than a factual report. Archaeologists focused on finding physical evidence for the civilizations described in ancient sources. They mapped sites, cataloged artifacts, and used emerging dating techniques such as stratigraphy and later radiocarbon analysis. No remains matching Plato's description of Atlantis were found in the Atlantic or Mediterranean region. Attention shifted to known Bronze Age cultures such as the Minoans on Crete and the Mycenaeans on mainland Greece. These societies exhibited advanced architecture, writing, and trade networks, but did not match the specific details of the Atlantis narrative. Ethnographic knowledge expanded with reports from European travelers and missionaries in Africa, the Americas, Asia, and Oceania. These accounts revealed the diversity and complexity of non-European civilizations. Observers noted sophisticated political systems, technologies, and religious traditions among indigenous peoples. Such findings challenged earlier assumptions about the uniqueness of European achievements and provided new perspectives on human cultural development. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the combination of historical criticism, archaeology, and ethnography had transformed the study of ancient civilization. Scholars relied on evidence from material remains, written records, and systematic observation. The Atlantis story continued to inspire speculation and popular interest, but academic research focused on cultures that could be documented through reliable sources and scientific methods. This shift marked a turning point in the understanding of the ancient world and the limits of historical inquiry. Debates on the plausibility of Atlantean social features. As academic research advanced, scholars began to examine the social features described by Plato in his account of Atlantis. Plato depicted Atlantis as a highly organized society with centralized government, advanced technology, and a complex legal code. He described a hierarchical political structure led by kings, with a large and disciplined military, monumental architecture, and an extensive system of canals and harbors. These features prompted debate among historians and archaeologists about their plausibility in the context of known ancient civilizations. European travelers and missionaries reported on non-European societies with complex political systems and sophisticated technology. Observations from Africa, Asia, and the Americas revealed indigenous peoples with elaborate religious practices, organized states, and advanced agricultural methods. These findings demonstrated that features such as monumental construction, irrigation, and metallurgy were not unique to the Mediterranean or Near East. They showed that large-scale social organization could emerge independently in different regions. Plato's description of Atlantis included elements such as a powerful navy, a network of roads and bridges, and the use of metals, like orichalcum. While no evidence for orichalcum has been found, archaeologists have documented the use of bronze, copper, and gold in various ancient cultures. The construction of large cities with palaces, temples, and defensive walls was also common in places like Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Aegean. Urban planning, water management, and monumental architecture were well established by the Bronze Age. However, no contemporary civilization matched all the features described by Plato for Atlantis. The Minoan civilization on Crete, often cited as a possible inspiration, had multiple palace centers and a decentralized political structure. Minoan society showed little evidence of large-scale militarism or imperial expansion, in contrast to Plato's account of Atlantis as a unified and aggressive empire. The collapse of Minoan sites involved abandonment and natural disasters rather than dramatic military defeat. Historians noted that Plato's portrayal of Atlantis combined realistic elements from known societies with imaginative or exaggerated details. The scale and complexity of the Atlantean navy, the size of the island, and the speed of its destruction did not match any archaeological record. Some scholars suggested that Plato drew on earlier flood myths and stories of lost lands, adapting them to serve his philosophical arguments. Debates about the plausibility of Atlantean social features continued as new discoveries were made. Archaeological surveys and ethnographic research expanded knowledge of ancient and indigenous societies, but no evidence confirmed the existence of a civilization identical to Atlantis. The story remained a subject of interest for its imaginative vision and its influence on later ideas about lost civilizations. Academic consensus held that while some features described by Plato were plausible for ancient societies, the specific combination found in Atlantis was not supported by historical or archaeological evidence. Botanical and zoological arguments for Atlantis. In the 19th and 20th centuries, some researchers explored botanical and zoological evidence in attempts to support the existence of Atlantis. They examined the distribution of plants and animals across continents, looking for patterns that might suggest ancient contact or a lost landmass in the Atlantic Ocean. These arguments appeared in scientific literature and popular works about Atlantis. Proponents of the botanical argument noted similarities in cultivated plants found in both the Old World and the New World. They pointed to crops such as maize, cotton, and certain beans, which were present in the Americas before European contact. Some writers claim that the presence of similar species in Africa, Europe, and the Americas could be explained by the existence of Atlantis as a land bridge or as a center of diffusion. They argued that ancient peoples might have transported seeds and plants across the Atlantic, either intentionally or by accident. Zoological arguments focused on the distribution of animal species. Researchers observed that some animals, such as certain frogs, lizards, and freshwater fish, appeared on both sides of the Atlantic. They suggested that these similarities could not be explained by natural drift or migration alone. Some proposed that Atlantis had once connected the continents, allowing animals to spread before the island's destruction. Others speculated that ancient maritime cultures, possibly Atlantean, had transported animals between continents. Advocates of these theories often cited fossil evidence and the discovery of similar extinct species in Europe, Africa, and the Americas. They argued that the existence of related fossils on different continents supported the idea of a former land connection. Some pointed to the presence of horses in prehistoric America and Europe as further evidence, although later research showed that horses became extinct in the Americas thousands of years before their reintroduction by Europeans. Botanical and zoological arguments for Atlantis relying on the idea of diffusion, the spread of species and technologies from a central source. Some writers extended these arguments to include domesticated animals, such as dogs and cattle, and cultivated plants, such as wheat and barley. They suggested that similarities in agricultural practices and animal husbandry could be traced back to a lost mother civilization. However, advances in genetics, paleontology, and biogeography challenged these claims. Studies showed that many similarities in plants and animals were the result of parallel evolution or independent domestication. Fossil records and genetic data provided alternative explanations for the distribution of species. The theory of continental drift, developed in the 20th century, explained how continents that were once joined could have shared similar flora and fauna. By the late 20th century, botanical and zoological arguments for Atlantis were largely dismissed by mainstream science. The evidence did not support the existence of a lost Atlantic continent or a central civilization responsible for the global spread of species. These arguments remain part of the broader history of Atlantis speculation, but are not accepted in current scientific research. Helena Blavatsky was a Russian spiritual teacher and author who co-founded the Theosophical Society in 1875. She became one of the most influential figures in the spread of esoteric and occult ideas in the late 19th century. Blavatsky's writings introduced a new approach to the Atlantis legend by combining spiritual teachings, Eastern philosophies, and Western occult traditions. Blavatsky discussed Atlantis extensively in her major works, including The Secret Doctrine, published in 1888. She did not claim to base her account on archaeological or historical evidence. But instead, she stated that her knowledge of Atlantis came from ancient wisdom preserved in secret traditions and from psychic revelation. Blavatsky described receiving information through communication with spiritual beings she called Mahatmas, or ascended masters. According to her, these masters resided in remote Himalayan monasteries and guided human evolution. She referenced the concept of the Akashic records, which she described as a cosmic repository containing all human experience, thought, and action. Blavatsky claimed that advanced spiritual development allowed access to these records, making it possible to learn about past civilizations, such as Atlantis. She taught that Atlantis was not only real, but was the home of a highly advanced race with both technological and spiritual ability. Blavatsky's account of Atlantis was detailed and elaborate. She described it as the fourth great root race in her system of human evolution. According to her teachings, the Atlanteans possessed psychic powers, advanced technology, and knowledge of natural forces unknown to modern science. She wrote that the civilization of Atlantis eventually fell due to moral decline and the misuse of power, leading to its destruction by natural catastrophes. Theosophical teachings on Atlantis included descriptions of lost continents, cycles of human evolution, and the migration of souls through reincarnation. Blavatsky stated that survivors of Atlantis spread to various parts of the world, influencing the development of later cultures in Egypt, India, and the Americas. She claimed that traces of Atlantean knowledge could be found in ancient myths, religious symbols, and esoteric traditions. Theosophy did not seek validation from mainstream science or archaeology. Blavatsky and her followers relied on spiritual insight, psychic revelation, and comparative mythology. The society published books, held lectures, and established branches around the world to promote these ideas. Theosophical teachings on Atlantis influenced later esoteric movements, including the development of New Age beliefs. Blavatsky's approach to Atlantis marked a shift from earlier historical or scientific speculation. She positioned Atlantis as a key element in a spiritual history of humanity, emphasizing the role of hidden wisdom and the evolution of consciousness. Her teachings continue to be studied by followers of theosophy and by researchers interested in the history of Western esotericism. Rudolf Steiner was born in Austria in 1861. He became known as a philosopher, educator, and spiritual teacher. Steiner was initially associated with the Theosophical Society in the early 1900s. He led the German section of the society for several years. In 1913, Steiner founded the Anthroposophical Society after disagreements about doctrine and leadership. Anthroposophy is a spiritual movement developed by Steiner. It incorporates elements of Western esotericism, Christian mysticism, and German idealist philosophy. Steiner taught that human beings possess both physical and spiritual components. He claimed that spiritual perception could be developed through disciplined exercises and inner work. Steiner addressed the topic of Atlantis in his lectures and writings. He stated that he used clairvoyant abilities and supersensible faculties to investigate the spiritual history of humanity. Steiner described Atlantis as a real civilization that existed between the periods of Lemuria and post-Atlantean cultures. He dated the Atlantean era to a period roughly corresponding to the late Paleolithic and early Neolithic, but he did not give precise calendar dates. According to Steiner, Atlantean society was fundamentally different from modern civilization. He claimed that Atlanteans had a different form of consciousness, which he called picture consciousness. In his account, Atlanteans experienced the world through vivid inner images rather than abstract thinking. Steiner said that this mode of perception allowed them to interact directly with spiritual beings and natural forces. Steiner described Atlantean technology as a blend of spiritual and physical knowledge. He stated that the Atlanteans could harness energies from plants, crystals, and water. They were said to use these forces for transportation and construction. Steiner did not claim that Atlanteans had machines similar to those of the modern era. Instead, he emphasized their intuitive relationship with nature. Steiner taught that the decline of Atlantis was caused by the misuse of spiritual abilities and the rise of selfishness. He stated that natural catastrophes, including floods and earthquakes, destroyed the civilization. Survivors of Atlantis, according to Steiner, migrated to different parts of the world. He claimed that these groups became the ancestors of later cultures in Asia, Africa, and Europe. Anthroposophy presents the evolution of human consciousness as a series of stages. Steiner placed Atlantis as a transitional phase between earlier and later forms of awareness. He taught that modern humans have lost the picture consciousness of the Atlanteans, but have gained the capacity for logical and individual thought. Steiner's account of Atlantis is not based on archaeology or conventional history. It relies on his claimed spiritual investigations and clairvoyant research. Anthroposophy continues to teach about Atlantis in the context of spiritual development, education, and the evolution of consciousness. Steiner's ideas remain influential in anthroposophical schools and communities worldwide. Edgar Cayce was born in 1877 in Kentucky, United States. He became known as a clairvoyant and faith healer who conducted trance readings for clients. Cayce's readings took place between 1901 and 1944. He entered a self-induced trance and answered questions on topics including health, past lives, and ancient history. His followers recorded and transcribed more than 14,000 readings. Casey's readings included numerous references to Atlantis. He described Atlantis as a real, technologically advanced civilization located in the Atlantic Ocean. According to Casey, Atlantis reached its peak tens of thousands of years ago. He claimed that Atlanteans possessed advanced energy sources, flying machines, and crystals used for power generation. Casey stated that Atlantis experienced 3 major periods of destruction, with the final sinking occurring around 10,000 BC. Casey connected Atlantis to his concept of reincarnation. He told clients that many people living in the 20th century were reincarnations of Atlantean. According to the readings, souls who lived in Atlantis returned in new bodies to work through unresolved karma. Casey said that these individuals often displayed unusual talents, strong personalities, or a sense of destiny. He advised clients to reflect on their past lives in Atlantis to understand present challenges and opportunities. Casey's readings described Atlantean society as divided between 2 factions. One group, called the Sons of the Law of One, promoted spiritual development and harmony with nature. The other group, called the Sons of Belial, pursued material power and self-interest. Casey stated that the conflict between these groups led to the misuse of technology and ultimately the destruction of Atlantis. He warned that similar patterns could appear in modern times. Casey's descriptions of Atlantis included specific details about geography and technology. He claimed that parts of Atlantis survived as islands after the main continent sank. He named locations such as Bimini in the Bahamas as remnants of Atlantis. Casey predicted that evidence of Atlantis would be discovered in these areas, including submerged temples and records. He also described Atlantean technology as involving crystal energy, sound waves, and anti-gravity devices. Casey's approach to Atlantis did not rely on archaeological or historical evidence. His information came from trance readings, which he said accessed the Akashic records. The readings were spiritual or metaphysical in nature, not scientific. Mainstream archaeology does not recognize Casey's claims about Atlantis or reincarnation. However, his ideas influenced New Age beliefs and alternative history movements. Casey's followers established organizations to preserve his readings and promote his teachings. The Association for Research and Enlightenment, founded in 1931, continues to study and publish his work. Casey's legacy remains significant in the context of American spiritualism and the ongoing fascination with Atlantis. Search for Atlantis in the Mediterranean and beyond. In the 20th century, researchers and explorers proposed various locations for Atlantis. Many focused on the Mediterranean region, while others looked farther afield. The search for Atlantis became a multidisciplinary effort involving archaeology, geology, oceanography, and history. One of the most influential figures in this search was Spiridon Marinatos, a Greek archaeologist. In the 1930s and 1960s, Marinatos investigated the Bronze Age civilization of the Minoans on the island of Crete. He noted the presence of thick pumice deposits at Minoan archaeological sites. These deposits indicated a massive volcanic eruption. Marinatos linked this event to the eruption of the island of Thera, now called Santorini, around 1600 BCC. He argued that the destruction caused by the Thera eruption matched some aspects of Plato's description of Atlantis' sudden end. Archaeologists found that the Minoans had advanced architecture, art, and trade networks. However, their society was decentralized and lacked evidence of a unified imperial power or large-scale militarism. The Minoan collapse involved abandonment and natural disasters rather than a dramatic military defeat. No direct archaeological evidence connected Minoan Crete to Plato's Atlantis, but the Thera eruption theory remained influential. Other researchers explored the possibility that Atlantis was located in the western Mediterranean or the Atlantic Ocean. Some suggested the region near the Strait of Gibraltar, including the submerged area of the Gulf of Cadiz. Others proposed locations such as the Azores, the Canary Islands, or even the Caribbean. Expeditions used sonar, underwater photography, and diving equipment to search for submerged ruins or geological features that might match Plato's account. In the Black Sea, marine archaeologists conducted extensive surveys using advanced sonar technology. Robert Ballard, known for discovering the wreck of the Titanic, led explorations of the Black Sea floor. His team found submerged river channels, beach ridges, and preserved wooden structures. Dating of these materials suggested human habitation before a major flood event about 7,000 years ago. Some researchers linked the Black Sea flood to ancient flood myths, but no evidence of an advanced civilization like Atlantis was found. Geologists and oceanographers also examined claims of underwater structures in the Atlantic and Caribbean. Many formations, such as the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, were found to be natural limestone features. Scientific dating placed their origin long before any known human civilization. Similar investigations in the Mediterranean, including off the coast of southern Spain and Malta, revealed submerged settlements and geological features, but none matched Plato's description of Atlantis in scale or detail. The search for Atlantis has produced valuable discoveries about ancient coastal settlements, natural disasters, and the effects of sea level change. Despite decades of exploration, no site has been confirmed as the historical Atlantis described by Plato. The legend continues to inspire new hypotheses and investigations. Minoan civilization and the Thera eruption hypothesis. The Minoan civilization developed on the island of Crete during the Bronze Age. Archaeologists date its rise to around 3000 BC, with its peak between 2000 and 1450 BC. The Minoans built large palace complexes, such as Knossos, Phaistos, and Melia. These palaces served as administrative, religious, and economic centers. Minoan society produced advanced pottery, frescoes, and metalwork. Their writing systems included Cretan hieroglyphs and linear script, though linear remains undeciphered. The Minoans established extensive trade networks throughout the eastern Mediterranean. They exchanged goods with Egypt, Anatolia, Cyprus, and mainland Greece. Minoan ships transported olive oil, wine, pottery, and textiles. Archaeological evidence shows that Minoan culture influenced nearby regions, especially the Cycladic and Mycenaean civilization. The island of Thera, now called Santorini, lies north of Crete. Around 1600 BC, Thera experienced one of the largest volcanic eruptions in recorded history. The eruption released massive amounts of ash, pumice, and volcanic gases. It destroyed much of the island, including the settlement of Akrotiri. Ash from the eruption spread across the Aegean and eastern Mediterranean. Layers of volcanic debris have been found in archaeological sites on Crete and other islands. The Thera eruption had significant environmental effects. It triggered tsunamis that reached the northern coast of Crete. These waves damaged coastal settlements and harbors. Ashfall disrupted agriculture, contaminated water sources, and blocked sunlight. Climate records from tree rings and ice cores show evidence of a short-term cooling period. The eruption likely caused food shortages and economic instability in the region. The Minoan palaces on Crete suffered destruction and abandonment shortly after the Thera eruption. Archaeologists have found evidence of fire, collapse, and rapid rebuilding at sites like Knossos and Phaistos. Some palaces were never reoccupied. The timing of these events suggests a connection between the eruption and the decline of Minoan civilization. However, the process was not immediate or uniform. Some Minoan centers continued for decades after the eruption. The Thera eruption hypothesis proposes that the disaster inspired later Greek myths and stories. Scholars suggest that memories of a powerful, advanced society destroyed by natural catastrophe influenced Plato's account of Atlantis. The similarities include sudden destruction, flooding, and a loss of a maritime culture. However, there are differences. The Minoans were not a unified empire, and there is no evidence of a military conflict with Athens. Archaeological research on Crete and Thera continues. Excavations at Akrotiri and Minoan sites provide new information about daily life, trade, and the impact of the eruption. The Minoan civilization remains one of the most advanced prehistoric cultures in Europe. The Thera eruption hypothesis remains a leading explanation for the origin of the Atlantis legend, but it does not account for all details in Plato's narrative. Geological formations mistaken for Atlantean ruins. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, several underwater and coastal geological formations have been mistaken for the ruins of Atlantis. Claims of artificial structures have appeared in the Atlantic, Mediterranean, and Caribbean regions. Many of these claims have been investigated by geologists, archaeologists, and marine scientists using modern survey techniques. One well-known example is the so-called Bimini Road in the Bahamas. Discovered in 1968, the Bimini Road consists of a series of large flat limestone blocks arranged in a linear formation on the seafloor. Early proponents argued that the formation was a paved road or wall built by the Atlanteans. However, geological studies have shown that the blocks are naturally occurring beach rock. The regular shapes and patterns result from the fracturing of limestone along natural joints and bedding planes. These processes are driven by wave action, chemical weathering, and pressure changes over thousands of years. Similar patterns have been observed in other coastal regions. In the Mediterranean, researchers have found submerged platforms and terraces off the coasts of Malta, Spain, and southern France. These features sometimes resemble steps, walls, or pavement. Detailed mapping and sampling have demonstrated that most are the result of marine erosion, sediment deposition, and tectonic activity. Changes in sea level since the last ice age have submerged ancient shorelines, creating the impression of lost structure. The Yonaguni Monument, located off the coast of Japan, is another frequently cited example. Discovered in 1986, the site features massive sandstone formations with sharp angles and flat surfaces. Some divers and authors have claimed the monument is a sunken city or pyramid. Japanese geologists, however, have identified the features as natural formations produced by the fracturing and weathering of sandstone. The orientation and regularity of the shapes are consistent with known geological processes in the region. Geological dating methods have placed the formation of these structures long before the appearance of advanced human societies. The age of the Bimini Road, for example, is estimated at several thousand years, with some parts dating back to the late Pleistocene. The Yonaguni formations are millions of years old, predating any possible human construction. Scientific investigations often involve sonar mapping, underwater photography, and the collection of rock samples. These methods provide precise measurements and allow researchers to distinguish between natural and artificial features. In most cases, no artifacts, tools, or cultural remains are found in association with the formations. Despite scientific explanations, reports of Atlantean ruins continue to attract public interest. The resemblance of natural formations to human architecture can be striking, but geological evidence consistently supports natural origins for these sites. The search for Atlantis has led to valuable discoveries about coastal geology and underwater landscapes, even as the legend itself remains unconfirmed. Sonar mapping and Black Sea flood evidence. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, advances in sonar mapping technology transformed underwater archaeological research. Sonar, which uses sound waves to create detailed images of the seafloor, allowed scientists to survey large underwater areas quickly and accurately. Researchers applied these methods to the Black Sea, a region with a complex geological and human history. The Black Sea is bordered by Eastern Europe and Western Asia. It connects to the Mediterranean through the Bosporus Strait. During the last ice age, the Black Sea was a much smaller freshwater lake. As glaciers melted and sea levels rose, salt water from the Mediterranean eventually flooded into the basin. This event transformed the Black Sea into a large, deep, and mostly anoxic body of water. In the 1990s, marine geologists and archaeologists began systematic sonar surveys of the Black Sea floor. They used side-scan sonar and sub-bottom profilers to map submerged landscapes, river channels, and ancient shorelines. The surveys revealed evidence of extensive dry land that existed before the flood. Sonar images showed old riverbeds, beach ridges, and delta formations now covered by water. Robert Ballard, an oceanographer known for discovering the wreck of the Titanic, led several expeditions to the Black Sea. His team used remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, equipped with cameras and sampling tools. In deep, oxygen-poor waters, they discovered remarkably well-preserved wooden structures and artifacts. The lack of oxygen slowed decay, allowing organic materials to survive for thousands of years. Samples of wood, pottery, and plant remains were collected from the submerged sites. Radiocarbon dating indicated that some of these materials were about 7,000 years old. This evidence supported the theory that people lived along the ancient Black Sea coast before the flood. The sudden rise in sea level would have forced these communities to abandon their settlements and move inland. Geologists analyzed sediment cores from the Black Sea floor. The cores revealed a sharp transition from freshwater to saltwater conditions, marked by changes in shell types and sediment composition. This layer corresponded to the estimated time of the flood, around 5,600 BC. The evidence suggested a rapid and dramatic environmental change. The Black Sea flood theory gained attention as a possible source for ancient flood myths, including stories from Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean. Some researchers proposed that memories of the event influenced later legends, but no direct link to Atlantis was established. The sonar mapping and underwater discoveries provided valuable information about prehistoric climate change, human migration, and the impact of rising sea levels on ancient societies. Preservation of ancient sites in anoxic waters. The Black Sea is notable for its unique underwater environment. Most of its deep waters are anoxic, meaning they lack oxygen. This condition results from the limited mixing of surface and deep waters, and the inflow of dense, salty water from the Mediterranean. The absence of oxygen creates a stable environment where organic material decays very slowly or not at all. This preservation effect is rare in most marine or freshwater settings, where wood, textiles, and other organic remains usually decompose rapidly. Archaeologists working in the Black Sea have taken advantage of these anoxic conditions. Remotely operated vehicles and submersibles allow researchers to explore depths beyond the reach of conventional diving. These vehicles can collect samples, record high-resolution video, and map the seafloor with precision. The preservation of ancient shipwrecks and settlements in the Black Sea has provided new insights into early seafaring and coastal life. Several shipwrecks discovered in the Black Sea are exceptionally well preserved. Wooden hulls, masts, and even cargoes have survived for centuries, protected from wood-boring organisms and bacterial decay. Some wrecks date back to the Byzantine and Roman periods, while others are older. The details of construction, rigging, and shipboard equipment are often intact, offering direct evidence of ancient maritime technology and trade. In addition to shipwrecks, archaeologists have located submerged settlements along the ancient coastline. These sites include wooden structures, tools, and domestic artifacts. The preservation of wood, plant remains, and even textiles provides information about building techniques, diet, and daily activities. Radiocarbon dating of these materials helps establish a timeline for human occupation and the timing of the Black Sea flood. The anoxic waters also preserve plant pollen, seeds, and animal bones. These remains allow scientists to reconstruct the environment and understand how people adapted to changing conditions. Analysis of preserved grains and food residues reveals what crops were grown and how they were processed. Animal bones show patterns of domestication, hunting, and diet. The study of preserved sites in the Black Sea has expanded knowledge of prehistoric societies in southeastern Europe and Western Asia. The findings demonstrate the importance of coastal settlements and maritime connections in early human history. The anoxic environment of the Black Sea acts as a natural archive, maintaining a record of past human activity that would otherwise be lost. Researchers continue to survey the Black Sea floor using sonar, photography, and sampling. Each new discovery adds to the understanding of ancient life and the effects of environmental change. The preservation found in anoxic waters remains a valuable resource for archaeology and the study of early civilizations. Technological advances in underwater exploration. Underwater exploration has changed rapidly in recent decades due to significant technological advances. One of the most important developments has been the use of sonar mapping. Side-scan sonar and multi-beam echo sounders allow researchers to create detailed images of the seafloor. These tools can identify shipwrecks, submerged settlements, and geological features with high precision. Sonar mapping is now a standard method in marine archaeology and oceanography. Remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, have also transformed underwater research. ROVs are unmanned, tethered submersibles equipped with cameras, lights, and robotic arms. They can operate at depths far beyond the reach of human divers. ROVs collect video footage, take photographs, and retrieve samples from the sea floor. They are used to investigate shipwrecks, ancient harbors, and natural formation. ROVs allow scientists to explore dangerous or inaccessible sites while maintaining safety and control from the surface. Autonomous underwater vehicles, or OVs, represent another step forward. Unlike ROVs, OVs are not tethered to a support ship. They are programmed to follow specific survey routes and collect data independently. OVs carry sonar equipment, cameras, and environmental sensors. They can cover large areas efficiently and are used to map submerged landscapes, search for artifacts, and monitor changes in underwater environments. Advances in underwater imaging have improved documentation and analysis. High-definition cameras and 3D photogrammetry allow researchers to create accurate digital models of sites and objects. These models can be studied in detail, shared with other scientists, and used for public education. Digital archives preserve information about fragile sites that may be threatened by erosion, currents, or human activity. Precise dating techniques have become essential in underwater archaeology. Radiocarbon dating is used to determine the age of organic materials such as wood, seeds, and textiles. Other methods, including dendrochronology and optically stimulated luminescence, provide additional ways to date artifacts and sediments. These techniques help establish timelines for settlement, trade, and environmental change. Marine geophysics contributes to the understanding of submerged sites. Magnetometers detect metallic objects and buried structures. Sub-bottom profilers reveal layers of sediment and hidden features beneath the sea floor. These instruments help locate and interpret ancient remains without disturbing the site. International collaboration has expanded the scope of underwater research. Scientists from multiple countries share equipment, expertise, and data. Joint expeditions investigate shipwrecks, lost cities, and submerged landscapes in the Mediterranean, Black Sea, and other regions. The combination of advanced technology and cooperation continues to drive discoveries in underwater archaeology. Each new tool and method adds to the ability to document, analyze, and understand the human past beneath the water. Geological evidence for past climates in Antarctica. Geologists have studied Antarctica to reconstruct its environmental history and past climates. The continent is covered by ice sheets that are, in some places, more than 4 kilometers thick. To access evidence beneath the ice, scientists use ice core drilling, sediment sampling, and remote sensing. Ice cores are cylinders of ice extracted from deep within the Antarctic ice sheet. Each layer of ice represents a year or a season of snowfall. Scientists analyze the trapped air bubbles, dust, and isotopic composition in these layers. The data provide information about atmospheric composition, temperature, and precipitation patterns over hundreds of thousands of years. Ice core records from sites such as Dome Sea and Vostok have revealed cycles of glacial and interglacial periods. These records show that Antarctica has experienced repeated episodes of warming and cooling. Marine sediment cores are collected from the ocean floor around Antarctica. Researchers use drilling ships to extract long columns of sediment. These sediments contain microfossils, chemical markers, and layers of ancient plant material. By examining these cores, scientists identify periods when Antarctica's coastal areas were ice-free or supported vegetation. Fossilized pollen and spores indicate that the continent once had forests and tundra ecosystems. Coal deposits and fossilized wood have been found in exposed rock formations in Antarctica's transantarctic mountains and other regions. These discoveries show that, during the Permian and early Cretaceous periods, Antarctica had a much warmer climate. Large forests of tree ferns, conifers, and other plants grew across the continent. Fossilized leaves and tree trunks provide direct evidence of this ancient vegetation. Geologists have also identified fossilized remains of freshwater and marine animals, including amphibians, reptiles, and early mammals. These fossils confirm that Antarctica's environment supported diverse life forms before the onset of extensive glaciation. The presence of dinosaur fossils in certain Antarctic rock layers points to a temperate climate during the Mesozoic era. Sediment analysis from the continental shelf and deep sea cores reveals fluctuations in ice coverage. During interglacial periods, parts of the Antarctic coastline were ice-free, and meltwater streams flowed into the sea. Layers of marine microfossils, such as diatoms and foraminifera, show changes in ocean temperature and productivity. Radiometric dating methods, including uranium lead and argon-argon techniques, are used to establish the age of rocks and fossils. These dates help geologists build a timeline of climatic events and environmental transitions in Antarctica. The combined evidence from ice cores, sediment cores, and fossils demonstrates that Antarctica's climate has changed dramatically over millions of years. The continent has shifted from lush, forested landscapes to its current state as an icy desert. This geological record is crucial for understanding global climate patterns and the history of Earth's polar regions. Fossil discoveries and environmental reconstruction. Fossil discoveries in Antarctica have provided direct evidence of the continent's ancient environments. In the transantarctic mountains, paleontologists have uncovered fossilized tree trunks, leaves, and seeds. These plant fossils include Glossopteris, a genus of seed ferns that dominated southern continents during the Permian period. Glossopteris fossils are found in thick layers of sedimentary rock, indicating widespread forests that once covered Antarctica. Researchers have also found petrified wood from large trees, such as conifers and ginkgo. The size and preservation of these trunks show that conditions once supported significant plant growth. Leaf impressions and cuticle remains allow scientists to identify species and reconstruct the composition of ancient forests. Pollen grains and spores, preserved in sediment cores and rock layers, provide additional information about the types of plants present and their seasonal cycles. Animal fossils have also been discovered in Antarctic rocks. In Triassic and Jurassic formations, paleontologists have identified remains of amphibians, reptiles, and early dinosaurs. Fossils of Lystrosaurus, a herbivorous synapsid, have been found in Antarctica, as well as in Africa and India. This distribution supports the theory that these continents were once joined as part of the supercontinent Gondwana. Other discoveries include fossilized fish, freshwater invertebrates, and marine reptiles such as plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs. During the Cretaceous period, Antarctica supported diverse ecosystems. Fossil evidence includes bird bones, early mammals, and a variety of plant species. The presence of flowering plants and temperate forest trees suggests a mild climate with long periods of daylight during the austral summer. Fossilized root systems and growth rings in wood samples provide information about soil conditions and annual climate variations. Sediment cores from the Antarctic shelf contain microfossils, such as diatoms and foraminifera, which help reconstruct past ocean temperatures and productivity. Layers with abundant microfossils indicate periods of warmer seas and reduced ice cover. Analysis of these cores reveals shifts in marine ecosystems and the timing of glaciation events. Chemical signatures, including stable isotopes of oxygen and carbon, allow scientists to estimate past temperatures and the extent of ice sheets. Fossil discoveries are carefully documented and cataloged. Teams use GPS coordinates, photographs, and detailed field notes to record the location and context of each find. Laboratory analysis includes microscopic examination, radiometric dating, and comparison with fossils from other continents. This systematic approach builds a comprehensive picture of Antarctica's environmental history. The combined fossil and sedimentary evidence enables researchers to reconstruct the continent's transition from a green, forested land to a frozen desert. These findings are used to refine models of continental drift, climate change, and the evolution of life in polar regions. Speculations on ancient navigation and cartography. Interest in ancient navigation and cartography increased as explorers and historians uncovered new evidence about early seafaring and mapping. Archaeological finds from the Mediterranean, Indian Ocean, and Pacific regions show that human societies developed maritime skills thousands of years ago. Remains of boats, harbors, and navigational tools have been found at sites dating back to the Neolithic and Bronze Age periods. In Egypt, depictions of reed boats and river journeys appear in tomb paintings from the 3rd millennium BC. The Minoans of Crete constructed large wooden ships for trade and travel across the Aegean Sea by 2000 BCE. Phoenician sailors from the Levant established trade routes throughout the Mediterranean and ventured beyond the Strait of Gibraltar as early as the 1st millennium BC. Ancient navigators relied on observations of the sun, stars, winds, and current. They used simple instruments such as sounding weights, lead lines, and primitive compasses. In the Pacific, Polynesian voyagers developed sophisticated methods for reading wave patterns, bird flight, and cloud formations to guide their canoes across vast distances. Evidence from Lapita pottery and genetic studies indicates that Polynesians settled islands thousands of kilometers apart between 1500 BC and AD 1000. Cartographic traditions developed alongside navigation. Early maps from Babylonia, Egypt, and Greece depicted rivers, coastlines, and territories. The Babylonian world map, created around the 6th century BC, shows a symbolic representation of the known world surrounded by water. Greek scholars such as Anaximander and Hecataeus produced the first attempts at scientific mapping. By the 4th century BC, Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy and described a grid system for latitude and longitude. Ptolemy, a Greek geographer in Roman Egypt, compiled a comprehensive atlas in the 2nd century AD. His Geographia included instructions for projecting the spherical Earth onto flat maps and listed coordinates for hundreds of locations. Ptolemy's work influenced cartographers for over 1,000 years. Roman and Arab geographers preserved and expanded on earlier knowledge, adding new information from travelers and merchants. Legends of lost lands, such as Atlantis, often referenced ancient navigation and cartographic abilities. Medieval and Renaissance maps sometimes depicted mysterious islands or continents in the Atlantic, inspired by classical texts and sailors' reports. The recovery of ancient maps and navigation records during the Renaissance fueled speculation about the extent of early exploration. However, no credible evidence exists for ancient maps showing Antarctica or other unknown continents before their modern discovery. Research into ancient navigation and cartography continues to clarify the capabilities and limits of early seafarers. Ongoing discoveries help historians understand how people charted the world and transmitted geographic knowledge across generations. Jules Verne was a French author born in 1828. He became one of the most influential writers of adventure and science fiction in the 19th century. In 1870, Verne published 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The novel introduced Captain Nemo and his submarine, the Nautilus. Verne described the Nautilus as a technologically advanced vessel, capable of long underwater voyages and powered by electricity. Verne researched contemporary scientific and engineering developments for his novels. He read reports on early submarines and underwater exploration. The Nautilus was inspired by real-life prototypes, such as the French submarine Plongeur, and earlier concepts by inventors like Robert Fulton. Verne expanded on these ideas, imagining a submarine with greater speed, range, and comfort than any existing model. In the novel, the Nautilus travels across the world's ocean. It explores the depths of the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific. Verne described the submarine's interior in detail, including its library, museum, and advanced life support systems. The Nautilus was equipped with electric lighting, air recycling technology, and powerful engines. These features reflected the latest scientific theories and anticipated future inventions. Verne's depiction of the Nautilus influenced public perceptions of underwater technology. Readers were fascinated by the possibility of exploring the ocean's depths. The novel inspired inventors, engineers, and explorers to pursue new developments in submarine design. Several early submarines built in the late 19th and early 20th centuries borrowed design elements from Verne's descriptions. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea also referenced the legend of Atlantis. In one chapter, Captain Nemo guides the Nautilus through the ruins of a lost city on the ocean floor. Verne described columns, temples, and statues covered by marine life. He did not claim that these ruins were the actual Atlantis described by Plato, but the scene blended myth with scientific imagination. The novel's combination of real technology and legendary themes helped popularize the idea of advanced ancient civilizations beneath the sea. Verne's work established new conventions for science fiction and adventure literature. His novels featured detailed technical explanations, plausible inventions, and global exploration. The Nautilus became a symbol of human ingenuity and the quest for knowledge. Later writers, filmmakers, and artists drew inspiration from Verne's vision of underwater travel and lost worlds. The influence of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea extended beyond literature. The Nautilus appeared in stage adaptations, films, comics, and visual art. Its design and capabilities shaped the portrayal of submarines and underwater cities in popular culture. Verne's blending of fact and fiction encouraged further exploration of the deep sea and the enduring mystery of Atlantis. Visual motifs in comic books and media adaptations. The depiction of Atlantis and underwater technology in popular media expanded rapidly during the 20th century. Comic books, films, and television shows adopted and transformed the visual motifs introduced in earlier literature and scientific speculation. The image of Atlantis as an advanced, submerged city became a recurring theme in these formats. In 1941, DC Comics introduced Aquaman, a superhero whose origins were linked to the lost city of Atlantis. The comic depicted Atlantis as an underwater kingdom with domed cities, glowing towers, and advanced technology. Artists used streamlined architecture, transparent tunnels, and marine vehicles to convey a sense of futuristic civilization beneath the ocean. Aquaman's Atlantis included both ancient ruins and modern innovations, blending mythological and science fiction elements. Marvel Comics followed with its own version of Atlantis, first appearing in the 1939 debut of Namor, the Submariner. Namor was portrayed as the Prince of Atlantis, ruling over a society with advanced weaponry, armored warriors, and massive underwater palaces. The visual style emphasized elaborate armor, aquatic creatures, and ornate throne rooms. Later storylines introduced conflicts between Atlanteans and surface dwellers, further developing the political and technological complexity of the underwater world. Animation studios and filmmakers adapted these motifs for a wider audience. Animated series such as Super Friends and Justice League featured episodes set in Atlantis, using bright colors, sweeping cityscapes, and imaginative sea life. Artists often depicted coral structures, bioluminescent lighting, and transparent domes to suggest an environment adapted to the pressures and darkness of the deep sea. Submarines, diving suits, and underwater vehicles were designed with sleek lines and glowing controls, echoing the influence of Verne's Nautilus. Live-action films expanded on these themes. The 2018 film Aquaman presented Atlantis as a vast, multi-leveled metropolis with advanced technology, genetically engineered sea creatures, and a diverse population. The film's production designers drew inspiration from marine biology, ancient architecture, and science fiction art. Underwater battle scenes featured armored cavalry riding giant seahorses and sharks, while cityscapes included luminous towers and flowing currents of aquatic traffic. Video games also adopted these motifs. Titles such as BioShock and Assassin's Creed Odyssey included underwater cities inspired by Atlantis. Designers used Art Deco elements, intricate mosaics, and flooded chambers to create immersive environments. Players navigated through ruins, interacted with marine technology, and encountered remnants of lost civilization. These visual conventions have shaped public perceptions of Atlantis and underwater exploration. The recurring motifs of domed cities, glowing structures, and advanced marine technology continue to influence new adaptations. The legacy of early science fiction and comic books remains evident in the visual language of modern media, blending of myth, archaeology, and speculative science. The story of Atlantis has often brought together myth, archaeology, and speculative science in both academic and popular contexts. Since the 19th century, researchers and enthusiasts have attempted to connect Plato's narrative with real-world discoveries and scientific theories. Archaeologists have investigated sites in the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, and even the Caribbean, searching for evidence of a lost civilization that could match Plato's descriptions. These efforts have sometimes resulted in the identification of ancient ruins, submerged settlements, or unusual geological formations. However, none of these findings has provided definitive proof of Atlantis, as described in the dialogue. Speculative science has played a significant role in shaping public interest in Atlantis. In the early 20th century, Advances in geology and oceanography led to new theories about ancient land masses and catastrophic events. Some scientists propose the existence of submerged continents or large islands in the Atlantic Ocean, such as the Mid-Atlantic Ridge or the Azores Plateau. These hypotheses were often based on interpretations of seafloor mapping, fossil distributions, or unusual rock formation. Later research clarified that these features were the result of tectonic processes and did not support the existence of a lost civilization. The myth of Atlantis has also influenced archaeological interpretation. Some scholars have drawn parallels between Plato's account and the destruction of Bronze Age societies, such as the Minoans of Crete or the city of Akrotiri on Santorini. The eruption of Thera around 1600 BC, which devastated Minoan settlements, provided a plausible natural disaster scenario. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of advanced urban planning, art, and trade in these cultures. However, the political structure and military expansion described by Plato do not match the archaeological record for these societies. Speculative science and mythology have often overlapped in popular literature and media. Writers and filmmakers have combined ancient texts, scientific discoveries, and imaginative reconstructions to create new interpretations of Atlantis. These works may reference underwater ruins, lost technologies, or advanced knowledge attributed to the Atlanteans. The blending of myth and science can be seen in documentaries, novels, and television programs that explore the possibility of ancient global civilizations. In recent decades, the Internet has accelerated the exchange of ideas about Atlantis. Online communities discuss new archaeological finds, geological theories, and interpretations of ancient texts. Some enthusiasts use satellite imagery and digital mapping tools to search for submerged structures or unusual patterns on the ocean floor. These activities often blend scientific methods with speculative reasoning, continuing the tradition of combining myth, archaeology, and science in the search for Atlantis. Alternative archaeology and online communities in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the Internet changed how people explored the story of Atlantis. Online forums, blogs, and video platforms allowed anyone to share ideas about lost civilizations. These platforms did not require academic credentials or formal peer review. Enthusiasts, amateur researchers, and professional scholars could all contribute to discussions. Alternative archaeology became a popular topic in many online communities. This approach often questioned mainstream archaeological conclusions. Participants proposed new theories about Atlantis and other ancient mysteries. They shared satellite images, underwater photographs, and personal interpretations of ancient texts. Some users posted detailed maps suggesting possible locations for Atlantis in the Atlantic, Mediterranean, or even Antarctica. Online communities formed around these themes. Members collected reports of archaeological anomalies, such as unusual stone formations or submerged structures. They debated the significance of these findings. Some argued that mainstream archaeologists ignored or dismissed evidence that did not fit established theories. Others tried to connect Atlantis to ancient Egypt, Mesoamerica, or the lost city of Yonaguni in Japan. Social media accelerated the spread of alternative theories. Viral posts and videos reached millions of viewers. Creators produced documentaries and podcasts focused on Atlantis and related mysteries. Some channels compared Plato's descriptions with modern archaeological discoveries. Others speculated about advanced ancient technologies or global catastrophe. Internet publishing also allowed for rapid response to new discoveries. When researchers announced the finding of a submerged structure or artifact, online communities quickly analyzed the evidence. Members shared their own interpretations and sometimes challenged official explanation. This process often led to the creation of new hypotheses about Atlantis' possible location and identity. Online discussions sometimes included technical data, such as sonar maps or radiocarbon dating results. Some participants used computer modeling to reconstruct ancient coastlines or simulate catastrophic floods. Others referenced genetic studies to support theories of ancient migrations. These efforts aimed to provide scientific support for alternative views, but they often relied on speculative connections. The internet also made it easier to access historical texts. Digitized versions of Plato's dialogues, medieval maps, and early modern treatises became widely available. Users compared translations and interpretations, seeking clues in the original sources. Some communities created comprehensive databases of Atlantis-related research, including both academic and non-academic material. Alternative archaeology online often blurred the line between fact and speculation. Some users emphasized open-minded investigation, while others promoted specific theories as established truth. The popularity of Atlantis in online communities reflected a broader interest in ancient mysteries and unexplained phenomena. These discussions influenced how new generations encountered the legend of Atlantis and shaped its place in popular culture. Role of Internet platforms in spreading Atlantis theories. Internet platforms played a central role in spreading Atlantis theories during the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Websites, forums, and social media sites enabled rapid sharing of information, images, and video content related to Atlantis. Dedicated websites appeared, offering collections of articles, maps, and historical documents. These sites often included archives of classical texts, including Plato's, Timaeus, and Critias, with commentary and analysis. Online forums such as Reddit, Above a Top Secret, and dedicated Atlantis boards allowed users to post questions, debate evidence, and share personal theories. Threads sometimes reached thousands of posts, covering topics from underwater archaeology to ancient linguistics. Users uploaded photographs of suspected ruins, satellite images of ocean floors, and scans of old manuscripts. Moderators organized discussions and sometimes invited guest experts to answer questions. Video sharing platforms like YouTube became important for visual storytelling. Creators produced documentaries, animated reconstructions, and interviews with researchers. Some videos examined geological evidence for catastrophic floods, while others compared Plato's descriptions to known archaeological sites. Channels specializing in ancient mysteries attracted large audiences, and videos about Atlantis often received millions of views. Comment sections became spaces for further debate and theory development. Social media sites such as Facebook and Twitter facilitated the formation of groups focused on Atlantis. Members shared news about new discoveries, posted links to academic articles, and organized virtual events. Hashtags and trending topics helped Atlantis-related content reach wider audiences. Some groups coordinated online campaigns to petition for new archaeological surveys or television documentaries. Collaborative platforms like Wikipedia provided summaries of Atlantis theories, listing major hypotheses and referencing primary sources. Wikipedia editors debated the reliability of evidence and the categorization of Atlantis as legend or history. The open editing model allowed for frequent updates as new information or claims emerged. Online publishing tools enabled individuals to write and distribute books, articles, and ebooks about Atlantis without traditional gatekeeping. Self-published works sometimes introduced new theories or revived older ones. Digital libraries and academic repositories made it easier to access historical and scientific research, supporting more detailed investigations. Crowdsourcing platforms allowed users to fund expeditions and research projects. Some campaigns raised money for underwater surveys or documentary production. Project updates and findings were shared directly with supporters through blogs and newsletters. Internet platforms also supported the translation and dissemination of Atlantis theories into multiple languages. This global reach connected enthusiasts from different countries and backgrounds. Multilingual forums and translated videos expanded the exchange of ideas beyond traditional language barriers. In summary, Internet platforms provided tools for sharing, debating, and expanding Atlantis theories. They enabled collaboration among amateurs, professionals, and enthusiasts. The result was a new level of visibility and participation in the ongoing search for Atlantis, academic publishing, and the challenge of peer review. Academic publishing follows a different process than online discussions. In academic research, scholars submit their work to journals or publishers. These submissions undergo peer review. Peer review means that other experts in the field evaluate the research before it is published. They check the evidence, methods, and conclusions for accuracy and reliability. Peer review is designed to maintain standards in academic disciplines. It helps prevent the spread of verified claims in archaeology, history, and related fields. This process is especially important. Claims about Atlantis are subject to the same scrutiny as other historical topics. Reviewers examine the sources, such as Plato's texts and the interpretation of archaeological evidence. Most mainstream archaeologists and historians do not accept Atlantis as a verified historical civilization. They point out that there is no direct archaeological evidence for its existence. Plato's account remains the only primary ancient source. Other ancient writers, including Thucydides and Strabo, either ignore or critique the Atlantis story. Modern scholars often interpret Atlantis as a philosophical allegory rather than a factual account. When researchers propose new evidence for Atlantis, academic journals require detailed documentation. This includes precise dating of artifacts, geological analysis, and comparisons with known historical sites. Submissions must also address previous research and explain how new findings fit into existing knowledge. If the evidence does not meet these standards, the research is usually rejected or published with significant caveats. Peer-reviewed journals rarely publish articles supporting the historical existence of Atlantis. Most published work examines the story's origins, its role in literature, or its influence on later cultures. Some articles analyze the geological or archaeological claims made by alternative researchers. These studies often conclude that supposed Atlantean ruins are natural formations or misidentified historical sites. The peer review process can be slow and demanding. This sometimes frustrates independent researchers and enthusiasts. They may feel that academic publishing is closed to new or unconventional ideas. However, the process is intended to protect the integrity of historical and scientific research. Academic conferences also play a role in evaluating Atlantis theories. Scholars present papers and discuss new discoveries. These meetings provide opportunities for critical feedback and debate. Proposals about Atlantis are usually met with skepticism unless supported by strong evidence. Some researchers attempt to bypass peer review by publishing books or articles independently. These works may reach a wide audience, but lack the credibility of peer-reviewed research. Academic institutions and libraries generally prioritize work that has passed through peer review. In summary, academic publishing and peer review set high standards for evidence and argumentation. This process limits the acceptance of Atlantis as a historical reality. It ensures that claims about ancient civilizations are based on verifiable data and rigorous analysis.